And there he is. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Excellent. Good stuff. Oh, good to see you again. So I've actually saw you in the real life. Me and John went for a drink during Dorking Unlocked. We didn't get to see any music, it would seem, but yeah, we went for one of those sort of could walk up to the bar, sit down there, don't come up too close.
Don't look at me. Don't say anything.
Yeah, put the money on the till and just point at the pint you want. And
Stay in your place.
yeah, and then we got accosted by a very enthusiastic person outside the chip shop who wanted to show us pictures of his bike, which was nice, but he's definitely a little too close for comfort in terms of physical distance.
Intense personalities, you know. It's
yeah, very intense
yeah.
personality. So yeah, that was I was a little bit, and then we got the wrong. We took the wrong chips out, so I had to go back to John's house, and he said, "You've got mine, I've got yours." I was halfway down the 24, like, "Ooh, okay, right."
Yeah, it was quite funny because I didn't actually think in my quite drunk state that maybe I should check which one is which, but
but it was like, yeah, I just get it because I think John and me don't even have each other's numbers, so I just get a Facebook thing through saying, "You have my chips," like, "Oh, okay," like I have your chips, like, "Oh, all right, okay." Turn around and then just do kind of like the drug dealer exchange, like out the window.
You got the stuff, yeah. Here it is.
Yeah,
you got the stuff, yeah.
Yeah, you got the stuff with the mayo. You got the special mayo on it, mate. Yeah, I've got a special
barbecue sauce. Oh, you dangerous man.
Yeah. I don't think they put. Yeah, exactly. I don't even think they even put the thing I wanted on mine. I think mine was just play. I had to put it all on myself when I got home. I was very disappointed. The amount of time I spent waiting out, talking to that guy, or trying to like just basically keep him occupied while talking about his motorbike. The amount of time it took to do that versus like the quality of the fact that my chip order wasn't put through properly. I was upset. They usually do quite a good job. So how have you been since that week? Because I've been all over the shop.
Well, we'll get onto that. But generally, I'm doing okay. I mean, I've had a few sleepless nights, to be honest. Just not to do with this podcast, but generally, I've been sleeping very well for some reason. I probably have to go see the doctor or something like that and just say I'm broken.
I just say, please fix me. I know you've probably got a lot on your plate at the moment, but I just generally need fixing.
A bit selfish, and like coronavirus hanging over everyone's head like a sword of Damocles. But sorry, I can't sleep very well. Can you fix me?
I'm just a bit. Can you do something about it? Can you?
I'm just a little bit. I'm sensitive right now.
Yeah, I just need. Can you just do something for me? I know you're looking for everyone, but can you just kind of figure out from my vague sort of description of just feeling a bit you could do something for me? Just be like, have a vitamin tablet and go to sleep.
Yeah. Consult the tea leaves. Think about it a little bit.
Have a cup of lukewarm milk, and then that'll send you off. I did that the other day though, and it does work. Like just put a bit of milk in the microwave. Like I don't know what the lactose intolerant do, but I'm not entirely soy maybe.
Generally not very happy that from what I hear.
Yeah, maybe that's why they just like because they can't sleep well. They're up all night thinking of thinking
cows.
of all the wrong thinking of exactly but they might have been like I don't even like cows, I just can't drink their product. I would quite happily get rid of a cow if it like meant that I could just have some cheese, but I can't even enjoy a bit of good Stilton because my body chooses to reject it. So
oh god, I can't imagine what that's like. That's got to suck. That's really gotta suck.
It's all very well if you make the choice to stop having it, but if you want it, and actually there's if you have Netflix, there Jim Jeffries' brand new special is basically it's an hour's worth of like an arc of a joke about being lactose intolerant and kind of needing a shit at the worst possible time with lots of stuff kind of peppered in between. I can't remember.
That's usually what happens when you really need a shit.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff peppered in between.
A lot of stuff happens in between. Yeah, the overarching story of the whole special is just I needed a shit and it was the worst possible time and the optics were against me. And here's also my view on the current scenario, the world today, intermittent with. So anyway, back to the fact that I needed this shit really badly.
Oh god, that seems like a whole tangent we could go on to, but we're here for something intellectual, aren't we?
Indeed it is, and indeed it is. I just say that I have not been idle in seeing the world in the last week. I feel like I'm literally like the Johnny Cash song. I've been to Stoke-on-Trent, Manchester, Preston, Norwich, Cambridge, Southern, Yeovil, Somerset, Bristol, everywhere. So I have seen. So nobody can say that I am in a bubble because I have very much seen most of the country this week in my travels, delivering.
Just a big old loop.
Yeah, just a big old loop. I had to stay overnight in Preston. I had to be escorted out of the hotel in Preston, not for anything I'd done, but we got there in the morning and they said a band of travelling folk have arrived and they're causing all kinds of trouble. We'll have to escort you to your vehicle because they've basically pulled up and surrounded the hotel, which was unnerving, to say the least.
Yeah.
I didn't really expect that, to be honest. To sort of, we had an overnighter, so me and the driver's mate, we got our own rooms and we had a meal and then we said our good night, said see you in the morning, come down in the morning, and then there's just look out the front and there's just caravans and tranches.
Caravan siege.
Yeah, it was literally a caravan siege. Yeah, and they just all the number plates were, I think, sort of Republic of Ireland or something. By the way, this isn't like me being like prejudiced. This is literally just what happened.
Just what happened.
It is just what happened. And the guys who were there were Northern Irish, and they said, I hate those people. They give us such a bad name. Said, and I asked them where they were from, and they said, we're from this was in Preston. They said, we're down the road in Blackburn. There's a permanent camp there, and basically we are 24-hour security, not for them, but for everybody else because of them. So. That was a bit of a tricky one, but it happens. I'm sorry, it's not made up. There's reasons that the security have to be involved. So did that. So the topic that you have researched on and I have had no time to look up.
To be honest, man, I'm going to completely level with you. I've been kind of very peripheral in my research as well. So what I think we should do in the process of this is kind of wing it, and we'll we'll go through. If you happen to have like another computer screen to look at.
I pulled some things up. I like the site that I usually go to that sort of contains the most what I'd call bite-sized information is actually rather summer-all rational wiki. It's rather summer-all of that particular thing, despite the fact that it goes into depths on things like the Luddites, which I found quite interesting.
Because that's where it comes from, the whole movement. Like they had a bad reaction to the whole technological advancement and just went, no, we want to live in the old times. And
well, the reason is that essentially it said it was I think it was the 1830s, I think, according to this. So it was basically based around a band of chaps who basically they brought in literally things like looms, like things like to just make clothing easier and what have you. And then because even though they were going to be asked to basically run those looms and maintain them, and they would still be able to collect the same money, these workers, they feared that was a slippery slope to them completely losing their job and basically falling into poverty, which they'd only really kind of just pulled themselves out of, just out of being serfs, essentially. So what they did is they would go in like at night and they would organize sort of little labor unions and whatnot to go into any factories where they'd up the technology factor and just smash everything to pieces. The one about the looms was there was a chap called, I think, what was his name? He was called Enoch something, and he actually built the looms that he was smashing. Here we go. I've got it here.
I made it. I can break it.
That's literally, apparently, that is his exact quote. The quote was from this Enoch's hammer. The Luddites' choice of choice was known as Enoch's hammer. And what did he say? So, the Luddites swung hammers. This is a quote. The Luddites swung hammers forged by a blacksmith named Enoch Taylor, who was also made machines for the adversary's mill owners. So literally, the guy who made the machines that went in the mill also made the hammers for the Luddites to smash the mill. So basically, he was cornering all the markets.
Do what you want, I make everything.
Yeah, the Luddites were known to say, Enoch made them, so Enoch shall break them. And the tool became known as Enoch's hammer. Yes, and the new Lud, and it's basically they say that what the thing with the Luddites is that you can sort of bring that into modern precepts and whatnot, because we have things like what I would consider myself liberal left. I don't consider myself anywhere near what one might call the hard green or the eco-fascist, where they just go, no, we just need to, there just needs to be no technology and we just all need to go back to being hunter-gatherers. But a lot of the and there's another word which is like a narco-primitivist, which is when you just kind of, well, I think it was basically when
my loincloth, I'm going into the garden, and that's where I'm going to live.
Yeah, just hopefully I'll find Raquel Welch bouncing around in her bikini or something equivalent to. And
it's never going to be that sexy, guys.
No, it's just going to be, sort of hairy armpits and beards all around. And that's just the women,
Oh, God, Partridge coming.
Partridge coming through. I can't help it. It naturally comes out of me like a fountain of Perrier. Obviously, if you shake it up. If you leave it chill, very unlikely you will get the soda stream. So there's that thing, and also the Unabomber. I don't know whether you know about the story of the Unabomber, who basically
that was the whole American he obviously bombed some several federal buildings, wasn't it? And,
yes, and weirdly
his diatribe was very against the sort of the advanced the capitalist state, wasn't it? Basically.
Well, weirdly it was, but he was one what called kind of quite traditionalist, I guess, is the thing. And weirdly, he had kind of had an education in very early. I think it was very early computers or laser technology or space technology. He'd been knee deep in what one would call the cutting edge technological revelations of the time. And yet somehow just something snapped in him that I think he thought that it would all be used only to the detriment of the average person. So if he worked backwards from destroying all of the, the basis of where all these technologies were coming from, and I think it took 12 years for him to be caught. It was just going on for 12 years, even though he wasn't bombing towards the end. He wasn't sort of that aggressive. But I think it's somebody saw a postmark they recognized, and they recognized handwriting from the same person on something completely innocuous in the postmark, and then literally suddenly goes, "Oh, I know who that guy is." And Ted Kaczynski, I think, was his name. I think there was a series on Netflix about it, which I didn't watch, but it was the main reason I didn't watch it is because it looked like it was a 12-part series of something that probably could have just been an hour. So, which they tend to do.
Isn't it funny how you find that on paid subscription services?
It is, because it's I would absolutely 100% watch it if it was, a drama or a comedy. That's fine, turn it into little segments. But a documentary series, especially for something that really's only got a lifespan of one man's life over 40 years. Yeah, can you really like flush it out over 8 umpteen episodes? Isn't it make one long 2-hour long documentary and then you absolutely probably have got it covered?
You find that with a lot of biopics. It's like they make it concise, but obviously
concise.
You can't really sell concise. So you've got to have
you can't sell concise, and you can't sell concise in bulk. I think a lot of the things that get greenlit, I think it's more like it's done with enthusiasm rather than kind of whether there's actually enough content to pull it off.
It's not like a study. It's more sort of like an experience, which they're after.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but that was something that interested me, and I think that also the attitude, that Luddite attitude as well, is probably quite prevalent in what I consider to be the worst bits of Extinction Rebellion, that everything kind of has to stop. The thing that was in it the other day, and this makes it really hard for me to want to be an environmentalist, because they do throw the worst people as the PR group, and it's come on, dude, send the person who kind of understands that the economy must go on and that we can kind of make changes that would be good. We don't have to just go pull the handbrake, shove society in reverse and go back. We can produce energy cleanly. We can kind of get to a stage where we sort of, if we put our backs into it, we can recycle a fair amount of things that would be detrimental to extract them from the environment, and we can do that. But then they're saying just ban SUVs, and it's well, these are not the SUVs on the road today are not like when I was at school. When I was going to a public school, SUVs back then, 4x4s were gargantuan, and they were always trying to be bigger than the next one, and they were all petrol V8s. They were maybe hitting 15 miles per gallon if they were lucky, but technology in 20 years has brought it on to the fact make them lighter, make them out of aluminium, give them more gears, put having AdBlue into the exhaust system so they don't kick out. Any car built now is Euro 6 emissions. If you compare my Ford from 1998, which was an economy car, to the modern Range Rover, the emissions from the newer Range Rover, which has a bigger engine and is like technically like a more, on paper, it should be a more gas guzzling car, is like, it wouldn't even come close. The Ford would just be way more efficient, far more miles to the gallon, more, less stuff out the end of the tailpipe, which is what essentially really what we want. We want to use as little stuff as possible. And at the same time, we want to kind of reduce what comes out the end, which leads to, I know this is ranting, but leads to my, my kind of like, I have to be the defender of diesel, which I don't take that as a mantle, but the people who just like read the periphery of the headlines go, oh, diesels are bad now, we should just stop having diesels. It's like, we should just get rid of them altogether, and go like, do you know how much like torque is needed like in a lorry to just shift all the stuff in the back from A to B? And like, if you had a petrol engine, you'd have to be filling it up every like 50 miles. Like the amount of grunt it would need to just go from A to B. Commercial vehicles would need like massive fuel tanks just to do a 200-mile journey. Like the fact is that diesel burns much more efficiently, more energy per volume is produced in diesel. And now, of course, they all have to be EU6 compliant or emissions compliant to a certain degree, so they don't, you sniff the back of a tailpipe of a 20-year-old Ford Transit van and then sniff the back of a tailpipe of a brand new 2021. And
by the way, not saying to do that.
Not saying to do that. Yeah, I'm just saying
that,
if that's where you want to get your kicks, that's fine. If you just want to stand at the back of like, if you want to stand at the back of the builder's truck, just sniffing
huffing
it, and then, huffing ethanol, trying to get a cheap high and like putting like a bag over the end and like screwing it up. Like, I'll have that for later. And then open it up.
Do you mind if I key in on it?
No, throw in.
My basically, going back to the root of it, that Extinction Rebellion, I think a kernel of that, and my view is more sort of like, ironically quite moderate with that. Because I could easily just be like, oh, they're a bunch of cranks and just not
hippies,
take any
trust fund kids.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll say that openly as like knowing that is the worst element of them.
I say that it's a very misguided movement. It's very metropolitan. It doesn't really have a set. This is the thing, like in terms of like, it doesn't work on good faith in people, and that's a concern I have with a lot of activistic politics nowadays. There's not appreciation of good faith on people that they're asking to change and to adapt things. It's, as I keep saying, it's more likely down to stupidity or ignorance rather than actual malice with a lot of things.
Yeah.
And if it's anywhere near government, you're kind of multiplying that reality massively. But that's just my own.
We're better in terms of how we consume things. We are better than where we were, say, even 10, 20 years.
Innovations, like you said, the innovations over the last 20 years in terms of sustainability, cleaner, like
very quick compared to like the 40, 50 years before that. Like the way that we've gone. I mean, just for example, like if you just talk about technology innovations, right? This thing, this 20 years ago was a brick that had an antenna on it and could do one thing. It could call. And if you look at like
not only a brick, but it's effectively multiple multimedia devices crammed into one. So it's effectively several different fields of technology all coalesced into one item. That's brilliant.
It is brilliant. And it's like we've adopted and we've used it to make life easier. Granted, it in certain ways it can make life harder. Maybe for the people who enjoy their privacy, they're never gonna, like, people who really are obsessed with their privacy, they're never gonna warm to that. But in terms of like, if you could sort of like apply the want to, I think you've almost got to tell people that you'd want to it, because who wouldn't want to go and fill up at the fuel pump less often? That's your pocket, that's money in your pocket going out. If you have got the choice of like going to, oh God, I've got to put fuel in the car again. This thing drinks so much, and then you go like, oh, I could, for the money that I've got, I could have the same car now on easy terms, maybe, which, even the cheap, like the cheapest car in the market today, something like the Dacia Sandero, is still going to hit minimum 40 miles per gallon. And back then, like maybe sort of in the 50s, sometimes in America, especially, like the trade-off of having a car that didn't cost a lot is it actually wasn't that economical, because like you had to make the trade-off of the fact that the technology had to be more rudimentary. You couldn't have fuel injection, and you couldn't have kind of like, like now, I think the Americans, like especially the Americans, have still been a bit loath to come around to the idea of energy saving. Like I do notice when I'm over there, like the times I've been over there, they seem to be kind of, they're always trying to be on the cusp of like alternative energies. But in terms of like what's in people's houses and cars and general everyday life is actually probably what will make the difference. So it's like the fact that there's no off switches on the wall for your electricity, the fact that the plugs are so unbelievably flimsy that electrical fires are just like, they're just so commonplace because you can knock it out and you can't even like switch the mains off. And that, the average, like an economy car,
there's no fail safes or anything like that.
No, there's no there. It's almost like everything is just kind of everything to do with power consumption is just like so fraught with risk and danger. And that, like the fact that they also seem to sort of, with the truck thing, like the whole obsession with like everything's got to, the newest truck's got to tow even more stuff, which is never going to do. Like 1 in every 1,000 people who buys one of those massive Dodge Ram trucks is going to use it to tow something, and everyone else is just using it as a big chrome posing pouch, essentially. Yeah. And it's just like, in order to do this, it's got to drink like a gallon of fuel every 10 miles. It's like, you're kind of like over egging the pudding a little bit in the way that they approach that. But that sells, unfortunately. But over here, I think that most people, like anytime I meet someone now who's got like upgraded their work truck, like, you won't believe the amount of miles per gallon that it does, or you won't believe that the tax rate is now so much lower because essentially it's kicking out so few emissions. It's like we've massively, that jump that we've made, especially in commercial vehicles, which often end up bearing the brunt of the most amount of limitations, like in terms of like taxation and
that was the New Labour thing with the actual no, actually I've got that misconstrued. It was the push it into diesel that New Labour they drove for, and then consequent governments afterwards kind of went, actually a bit wary on the whole green thing, and they tried to wheel it back. But
I can definitely tell you that it made a difference, and I'll tell you why. Because when I worked in London in 2014 doing sort of reception and sort of admin work for a company in Russell Square, and I had to walk from Waterloo across the bridge to just a little bit north of the river. Yep. And I think during like June or something, a really hot June, there was an upcoming tube strike, as there want to be every so often. And what they did is to compensate for that, they put some of the older buses that were probably decommissioned 10 years prior back on the road. And I realized, like, when you look at the number plate, you saw some of them were from the late 90s. So at that point, they were almost 20 years old. And the difference in the air quality that day was horrific. I was like, I felt like I couldn't breathe. It was absolutely, honestly, like I was choking throughout the whole morning at work. And so was everybody else. I thought, my God, actually, when I walk, and I used to walk there anyway, and I never had a problem with the quality of the air. And it was on that particular day, I thought, actually, maybe this low emission zone congestion charge thing isn't actually a bad idea. Because the fact that they probably had to ask for dispensation to get those older buses out just to get people from A to B, because it's like I like my cars, I really like my cars, and I like but I appreciate the fact that like some older ones are just basically pollution factories that don't do much more than sort of go forward quite slowly and consume a lot of the planet's resources.
In a period of completely different mentalities, it was ultimately there wasn't any consideration about there wasn't actually any serious consideration about pollution.
No.
That came down to the manufacturers, at least. I mean, through the 70s and into the 80s.
Well, the fuel, funny enough, it said it was only the idea of not getting enough fuel with the 73 fuel strike, especially for Americans, that kind of went, we really shouldn't be making, like, cars that are as big as a house that maybe do, like, 8 miles per gallon tops, like we shouldn't.
Yeah, because if you don't have that easy access to fuel, you're kind of stranded, really, aren't you?
Exactly, yeah, which is why like people like Honda and Volkswagen, they absolutely cornered the market at that time, because the idea that you could get a little, it was a little car, but it did like 35 miles to the gallon. So if that meant that you were not worried about not being able to have enough fuel to get to work the next day. Actually, the guy from the guitarist from Blue Oyster Cult, he said that like during like when they got their first gold record, I think, for Don't Fear the Reaper, they said, I went out with my royalties and I bought 2 new cars. And he said, what did you get? Like a Camaro, Rolls Royce? He said, no, I got a Honda and a Toyota. There's a gas crisis, man. It's like, I don't want to get stuck on the way to the gig. So And from that point on, it was like, we actually have to kind of like, we have to take into consideration not only like what comes out the back, but like how many resources go into just pushing this thing forward. especially in California where the smog was so bad. You know, there's pictures of California where they go like, since they put, you know, people bitch and whine about, oh, regulations kill whatever, but it's like, yeah, but you can literally see the city from the mountains now. And when I was in LA in 2013, I had some people who'd lived there all their lives said, yeah, 15 years ago, if you were standing on this mountain, all you see is just like a haze.
Yeah, LA was, as much as it was portrayed in the films with obviously the filter, the cinematic filter.
That sort of orangey, hazy.
Real pictures were indicative of that at the time. But have you seen recently about the wildfires?
I have. Yeah, that's horrific, man. Like, and the shot of the Golden Gate Bridge in, like, basically it looks like that sort of
looks like a hellscape, man. Like the skies are burning red and all kinds of stuff.
It literally does look like the end of a like an apocalyptic film, and it's just like someone just put an orange filter on the camera. But that is the quality of the quality of the air, because it's apparently what it is a combination of heavy, like quite strong, like 50, 60 mile an hour winds, all the fires burning in, you know, the various states, but it's all the way to Colorado as well, apparently.
Yeah.
So it's everything just basically west of the, you know, the prairie states. It's just on fire left, right, and center. And that's I mean, that isn't good. And the fact that that's going to be like an uphill struggle to contain that as the years go on, that's even you know, is even more worrying. Despite the fact that I think they've pushed very hard to kind of like make themselves as a state. I would say the Western states have sort of pushed hard to make themselves as environmentally self-sufficient as it is. It's like once the effect of everything else that's going on in the world kicks in, there's only so much self-preservation you can do, really.
I would be a bit critical. I mean, we're kind of swinging for the fences in terms of tangents. We've gone very very far from Extinction Rebellion over to the United States, but I mean, from what I can tell, I'm a bit critical of where the Californian, especially in like Los Angeles and stuff like that, the policies that they're pushing there, because it's almost as if it's a very stringent, and it may seem to be an excessive situation of centralized regulation that doesn't really take into account the actual context and nuance of the situation around it. I'm going to ask you to embellish on that, because I'm interested into, you know, in layman's terms, where say regulation is being applied that maybe they've suited to. They pushed away from I think they've actually got a nuclear power plant over in California, and they're looking to shut it down, which is something that I find a bit nonplussed. I mean, there's in terms, I mean, obviously there's nuclear waste and stuff like that, but in terms of like the overall, it doesn't kick out anything that necessarily harms the atmosphere. Pollution. Yeah, not like a coal or a gas or an oil refiner, anything like that. And it's consistent. It's consistent power, and that basically the level of energy you can get out of something like that is enormous. And from what I've been seeing, like local authorities and even power suppliers, to do with the actual crisis and like wildfires and stuff like that, but also in general, I mean, there's a lot of factors that are playing into it. Obviously, the coronavirus lockdowns, they've got some of the most stringent lockdowns and limitations over in California in the United States. And I mean, on the East Coast, New York isn't just as bad, but the local governorship, they're basically being very stringent with power. And whether you're like holding parties, this was a while back, but if you're having like a party because everywhere else is shut down, like you can't go out, you can't do anything, and you're having a party amongst people against their legislation saying that you can't do that, wag your finger. But they basically
I get
they've been basically saying like, okay, we're going to cut your power off.
I didn't know about that. What you mean? You say if you basically just try and party down, like have a good time with loads of people, instead if you continue to do that, we'll shut off your power.
Well, this is the thing. It's like this is ultimately the human reaction to having all other alternatives taken away. But from what I'm seeing, their approach to like, because it is a very sort of like progressively minded, green focused mentality that seems to be very losing the wood for the trees. And,
I would probably agree with that. It does seem rather extreme, and if to be honest, if that is happening to like a ridiculous degree, like every sixth household is doing that, I would almost understand it. I would almost understand like that kind of reaction. I think it's a very difficult one. We'll talk about nuclear power, I think that I'm sort of on your side about nuclear power as well. It's not saying I'm poo-pooing any other kind of alternative energy. I was, funny enough, of all things, I was reading an article in a rock music magazine, about how the lead singer of Deep Purple is like has been pushing for wave power he said for about since he started being a musician. He said, I've been massive. He said, when you live on the coast and you see just like the power of the waves coming in and out, said, I can't believe that people would waste time on wind and solar when you literally turn like the whole, little bits and bobs of the coastline into ginormous power stations without basically affecting anything, which I think is probably, quite a good thing if you can harness like the use of, nature in that way, because the waves will always come in and out. That's true. I think it's a bit stupid when people go, oh, well, the sun goes away at night, so solar power should never be used. It's like, yeah, but it does sort of come back in the morning, and Germany runs something like 90% of its power off of that, and it has like cloud cover 60% of the time. Yeah. So even when the clouds are up, they say, look, even if there's a cloudy day, you can still get solar power in. But the thing with nuclear power is, which I have researched that, and I've also heard a lot of people phone into radio stations about it, is that the number one kind of bugaboo about it is that it'll always be connected with weaponry. Like it'll always be connected with death.
Everyone hears nuclear and they think nuclear explosion.
Yeah, they don't think nuclear power, they think nuclear explosion. Like in the same way that technically that's the pushback against hydrogen, is that everyone thinks Hindenburg, but it's like that was 1937. This is now 2020.
And that was a distinct event. Like, the equation of like, because obviously Chernobyl gets brought up in terms of nuclear power.
Yeah.
Even Fukushima over in Japan.
There's I see a lot of Fukushima woo on Facebook from the same sort of people, and I did have to explain like to somebody like they've got the map. They're sort of oh well, yeah, actually the poison nuclear water spread all the way to the Atlantic. I go, actually that's what you've just posted there is exactly identical to this like fishing rights map that I've just discovered. So it's like, this is kind of like a deliberate kind of like anti-woo. Obviously, when it goes wrong, it goes wrong, and it's pretty horrific.
But there are distinct contributing factors to both like those situations. Like Hindenburg was arguably due to ill maintenance and conditions at the time that basically caused it to catch against the
inefficiency and the technological limitations of safety back then,
and overall, ultimately human error, which is it was one of the main ones.
Because didn't it? I've almost forgotten now. I feel bad that I brought it up. Didn't it hit a pylon? Is that why?
That was what it's trying to connect to. Is basically Zeppelins basically would tether themselves to these large tethers, which are pylons, and due to like conductivity across the skin of it. It basically ended up striking it and breaching it, and it effectively
turning into a ginormous fireball.
Yeah. And
I can tell you something about the Hindenburg. Like the announcer is going, "Oh, the humanity! That apparently the original of that is, oh my god, the humanity." But when they sent it out to newsreels, they said, "Amp it up," like because it went out in that.
He didn't sound too.
He didn't sound like massively like panicky, but like what they did is when it went out to go to newsreels that wasn't just that broadcast, like when it had to be distributed worldwide, they apparently like they sped up the tape by about 20%, so it sounded like he was more hysterical, like oh the humanity, oh god, and that sort of thing. So it basically it over-egged the tragedy type thing, because there's nothing better for media than just basically like kind of ramping up.
Turn it up to 11, sensationalize it.
Turn up the misery and human suffering to 11, because that's good for like getting the bums on seats and the penny theatres and stuff. So in regards
speaking of human suffering, Chernobyl as the next thing.
Oh yeah.
Basically,
seamless tangent. Seamless corrosion. Yeah, I like that.
Basically, with Chernobyl, that was obviously one of my favourite trifectas of ideological blindness, big government, and ultimately human arrogance.
Human error, yeah.
Error and arrogance at the same time. And basically, it was effectively a very, very ill-maintained power plant, which is the main contributing factor. And the people in charge of it were pushing it beyond its capabilities and its maintenance So that was a contributing factor which caused that disaster, and then ultimately was compounded by the fact that they didn't want to admit to it. Arguably, they actually
trying to brush something like that under a carpet is a very difficult job, and probably will make things worse. You know,
it was found out by Swedish monitoring over in Sweden. Basically, found like the radiation in the atmosphere, and it was basically they found there was something major going on in Ukraine, and that basically brought it to the world's attention. But before that, and even after, the Soviet Union's authorities and the government were basically trying to downplay it, all to the fact that they effectively ended up turning an entire city of something like over 30,000 people.
Yeah, it was quite well populated. It wasn't a small town by any means. Yeah,
and they basically pulled all those people out of there in a night, and it never came back. And
I do know somebody who has done the Chernobyl tour. Pripyat. They've gone to I think it's called Pripyat or something.
Pripyat, yeah.
Pripyat, yeah. So he's done that, and he said it's the most bizarre, haunting thing ever, because you really can tell that just everything just like the Mare Celeste.
Everything.
Yeah, the Mare Celeste of cities is just everything was just left as it was, and they do tell you, don't disrupt, anything as best you can, don't. Flatten the grass.
Don't touch anything is one of the things.
Don't touch anything. Yeah, I mean, they do send you in there with like umpteen safety warnings. Apparently, you have to sign so many disclosure agreements. So many, I will not sue in case I get radiation poisoning. And I think that's right in the way that I am. As I may have said to Joseph McCarthy in the 50s, I am not a communist, but I totally agree that like just sort of doing things for the sake of kind of like trying to make things look good, but not executing them well for the sake of...
It was ideological prestige, ultimately. They were still fighting the Cold War, effectively, even though they effectively fallen out of the race by the 90s.
By the late 80s, yeah.
No, the late 80s and 90s, they effectively fallen out of the race because, in terms of like the... we talked about this previously, the economic argument was lost. Then they tried to play the cultural war. And
I think the technology, almost like in the way that social media has kind of opened up many people's eyes to other cultures, and maybe where their country you actually go, there's bits of it that are a lot better than I give it credit for, and then there's bits of it where you go, oh my god, actually this is far worse than another country's got a far better system for doing this, and why don't we do what this nation does, or why is it so impossible for us to get...
Yeah, in a place like the Soviet Union at that time...
Probably videotapes and magazines being just like funneled over the wall,
that was definitely a thing. I remember reading about that, actually. But in terms of the mentality, despite the fact that their people were very much desirous of liberalising and bringing down the barriers and actually rising up to the same level as the rest of the world, because effectively they've been stunted in terms of like cultural and economic growth, and it was all due to the overwhelming precedent that the socialist utopia had to be maintained, even if it was visibly falling apart at the seams.
Yeah. Which is why
Chernobyl was the archetype. Chernobyl was the archetype of that, and what happened to Pripyat.
Yeah, that's so. I totally get that. And that's why I go, look, I'm not in any way like, if you want to accuse me of being, like sort of wanting to live in Soviet Russia, I go like...
But you're reading material, Oscar.
What you're reading material, it's like, it looks a little red there, boy,
Yeah, this book on social dynamics is looking a little bit... Oh, it's got the word social in it.
Yeah, have you ever not been a member of the Communist Party? Like, no, I just, kind of like...
I went to a commune once.
I went to a commune, yeah.
Get him in the truck, boys.
I called the guy comrade once as a joke, like, to the chair. But yeah, so that's why, but you're talking about, like, in relation to industrial things, I think that what I was reading about, the short bit that I read about sort of, things with the Industrial Revolution, or basically machinizing, I don't know if that's a word, but if it isn't, I'm going to invent it now, mechanizing the economy. But also there's a human element added to it. And I think...
Yeah, the social change as well. Do you mind if I run with this a little bit? Basically,
yeah, go ahead.
From what I've read, well, generally, the understanding is probably understood by most people, but it was effectively a standardizing and industrializing of industrial output. Beforehand, before the Industrial Revolution, and this is sort of not completely definite. It wasn't a definite flip from one non-industrialized culture to another. It was actually a very processional thing over. In fact, it was something that started even earlier than the 1800s, and it was a progressional thing from there, bits and pieces. But obviously, it eventually came to a head.
It was very. I mean, basically, they were very agrarian economies. Yes. I mean, most colonies would just like grow stuff, sell it, people eat it, and then eat, sleep, repeat. So
cottage industry was one of the main things that stood out. Effectively, that was and also even before that, merchant guilds and basically artisans and generally skilled craftspeople would be in guilds, and they would basically sell their services to different places, different towns and villages and cities. And obviously, the culmination of these guilds in cities as they started to become.
Isn't that where Masons started or something? Or like
effectively, they're effectively a merchant's guild.
Yeah. I've done a lot of Masons gigs myself. I'd say for people who expect that they're going to draw a pentagram on the floor and some are doing it. No, it's like what they're doing is they're all essentially waiting on dessert and for Sweet Caroline to play. But they do. But like, what's interesting about
you're saying they're human?
Yeah. So, well, they're all like apparently they all have to have a trade.
They were lizards.
Yeah, I thought they were lizard reptilians. Apparently, you all have to be like a tradesman of a certain level, or you have to be kind of like you've had to have been a tradesman, even if you've gone through to like being the CEO and not picked up a hammer or like a drill in years. But you had to have been some sort of master of your trade to be in it. What they tend to do now is just mostly just raise money for things, really raise money for charity. But they do have like a very. It's weird because their traditions of like take wine with the honourable man, take wine with the honourable lady, those still feel very much rooted in, like the culture of 300 years ago. And the ladies' nights are kind of like almost like a new thing, almost still to them, because they've only been going for maybe less than a century, not even that. So the idea that you bring
coming from the Georgian and the Victorian cultural situation, very formal, very, very stringent in its structure. Obviously, men were the primacy, women were sort of and kept in a position of being secondary.
Domiciled, I suppose. Is
domiciled, I would say. I mean, that it was very much it was a patriarchal society in that form. Please, feminists, don't start.
It's just like we're pointing it out. All right, we're pointing it out. We're not
acknowledging it. Shut up.
We're not saying it. We're not standing behind it, saying it's brilliant. It should never have been. We're just making a point. Let's all have a cigarette. Let's relax. Let's just remember we mentioned something bad. That doesn't mean we're standing behind it. That's what we've got to remember.
We're doing the obvious original sin of speaking about it as men.
Exactly. Yeah, two white men, may I add. Yeah.
God, I mean, how could we even?
That's exactly what the world of the world can definitely be set right by two middle class white guys from Surrey. Absolutely. We should just shut up and not say anything, even if we're trying to improve shit. So.
Yeah, very true. But in terms of that, definitely there was in that period from obviously starting back from the very sort of like in the after periods of effectively post-feudal society, especially in England and the United Kingdom, we still held on to that very that sort of like divide of authority. God, there was people that served and there were people that led, and it was effectively that for God knows how long. And obviously, in terms of that, the merchant guilds, craftsmen, it was obviously. The historical thing I'm trying to reach for, I can't remember.
You're trying to say that there was no like kind of there was a sort of odd transition between the two when there wasn't. Is that what you're trying to grab at?
Bear me 1 second. Actually, I'm just going to refer to a tome.
Oh, is that a
tome.
weighty? Is that a weighty tome? Oh,
It's
look
a
at
weighty
that!
tome. That is actually a very good book, and I mean,
How far does that go back? That book?
oh, it goes back to. Let me just have a look. It goes back as far as you like.
Lovely.
Oh, it goes back to Britain's invaders up to 1066. So it goes that far back. And
Isn't it interesting that like sort of the most we know of from school, like we know from 1066, and like before that, what was there? Like, oh, nothing. That was just like there was no country. Like it was only when stuff kicked off at Hastings, which suddenly appeared for people to get arrows in their eyes.
I mean,
that's literally where the country started, right there.
In terms of obviously the historical record wasn't really there for the times when we like Proto-Britons and stuff like that, and tribal. We were all very much for sort of like spoken passing on of histories and stuff like that. And even then, they weren't very
accurate,
factual. They're more sort of based in folklore.
Yes.
And
here be dragons and stuff. Yeah.
The thing I'm referring to in Georgian times, effectively, the landed gentry, which was effectively a. This is let me just.
Well, wasn't it like it was like a biological nobleman? It was like the begat the sons of whatever, and then the daughters, like that sort of thing. Yeah.
What I'm referring to is sort of like the drive away from that very aristocratic and very blue-blooded sort of thing. This ultimately pushed into what I would consider to be the origins of the middle class and the working class.
Yes.
And
not just lords and serfs. Like there was
you don't come from a royal bloodline or a lord bloodline or a ducal bloodline. You're a layman. You're a worker. But
you also still have if you are successful, you can lead a quality of life, which it wasn't.
And ultimately purchase land, which is one of the things that was the most dynamic changes in that dynamic. That was the major push away from the feudal.
You didn't have to inherit land. You could purchase land.
It wasn't a pyramid scheme where there was the
just one big lump on the top, and then just everybody other.
It wasn't king, and then
just a whole load of unlucky bastards,
and then everyone at the bottom. It was actually that sort of like evolution of the way that the society was structured, and that's what I'm kind of pushing at.
Which I think is interesting. It's bouncing back to 1066, which is the meme that I see being pushed a lot, and I see it from the usual you can sort of tell it's a sort of meme that a mum has shared without really realizing where it's coming from, because it's usually usually posted from like either the Britain First page or like white nationalists for a pure Albion or some fucking really far right bullshit like that, which is like they're not teaching British history in schools. And the problem is with me is if they leave the comments open and be like, we need to tell them about 1066. It's like, is that when England became mostly French by default, like by invasion? Like it's kind of like you're kind of standing a little bit behind like I'm not entirely sure why you think it's relevant, and also why you think history is not being taught in schools. Because I distinctly remember from about the age of 9 all the way up to the age of 16, when you had to have it as a course, I pretty much learned everything from 1066 up to the end of World War II.
I'd say about the same, actually, yeah.
Mostly just like wars, though. Like you didn't. What I find interesting is that you didn't really learn a lot about like sort of how we went from just, like as you just said, we went from just being like lords, dukes and serfs to there being a working class, there being a middle class, there being an upper class, like how basically people like us, would actually be able to build a standard of life and that sort of thing. It's like, here, this person killed that person, and that person killed this person, and these people invaded that lot, and then suddenly it was World War One.
To be fair, just as a touch on that, it's kind of like the only way I see that getting explored nowadays is usually through social studies, and I've got contentions with social studies.
Oh yeah, I know.
In terms of that, because it's obviously based very much in a sort of a framing and through a certain lens in my mind. But the victor,
history is written by the winners. So
history is written by the winners, certainly, but obviously exploring the cultural and ultimately the layman's history beneath all that. Obviously, you can do that without draping a whole layer of pretext and framing on that. I
definitely think you could bring it into a contentious topic now, which is when you're looking back at people of, you know, if we're talking about we're going to get rid of statues of people, or we're going to get rid of, you know, kind of like any mention of someone because if they did this good thing, they also held these racially prejudiced views. And I'm always thinking in the back, I understand where you're coming from, but you find me one person from 100 years ago that wouldn't hold like probably 60%. They might hold like things where you're 40% absolutely on board with them, but because of their unawareness of the wide world and all the things that make it work properly and all the things that make it work in harmony, and they're you know only ever living in the small town that they're born in, working and die in, they might not have had the education or the ability to look at things in a wider scope. And also the thing with working people, especially if they're like say workers' rights, and all they did, you know, from the day that they were old enough to hold a chimney brush, they were going up basically making good fodder for Charles Dickens stories, and then doing that all the way to when they probably died in their mid-40s from emphysema. If all they did was that, you know, it's like if all you're doing is just about surviving, keeping the wolf from your door, you can't take on kind of grander concepts of morals or kind of, you know, the rights and the value of others, or how the dynamics of how the world works. So, you know, like if they dropped,
there is so much involved in that. I mean, we're just taking it from the position of like we're very high-minded with our appreciation of the fact that we can just erase individuals and histories that we find offensive or just not.
I think that's
problematic is the major word.
Problematic's the big word that I find, but in the same time I go, is it not problematic to brush all nastiness under the carpet? Because what if you don't learn from it? You know, what if people don't see, you know, the bits of it? Because I mean, it's you know, and also I think that especially if you're in, say, somewhere like Germany, they have to be, you know, all generations since the Second World War in Germany have to understand what led their nation to basically being, you know, what one might call the pariah of an entire world twice because of their, you know, the collective actions. And then they go like, there's no point in, you know, people who get asked if you talk about, you know, Nazism once, regardless of how you're referencing it. And it's like, look, you should learn from that. You should learn about how people get into power because of what people are talking about. The thing, and I'm sorry if I'm going off topic, but I saw something the other day that I hadn't really twigged as to how the two were connected. And then I read the first paragraph of it, and it's the thing about the protocols of the elders of Zion, which was what the little anti-Semitic kind of Jews are destroying the whole world and they're coming to eat your children thing. And I was reading the front of it, and they said, does this sound like, you know, QAnon to you? Does this sound like the worst elements of modern anti-Semitism? I said, well, that's from 1902. But here's a bit from like the newest conspiracy theory, and it's exactly the same. So if you need to, you know, here's the things that they'll plant in the minds of the poorly educated, the working class, or the people with the voting power. Here's the things that they'll plant in your mind. Look out for
people
those
that want to believe in something. They will latch onto certain things if you put it in front of them.
Yeah, especially like if a boogeyman is like on that level as opposed to up there, you know, then it's much easier to find an enemy there. Which is why I go, you shouldn't sweep like acts of horrific violence or that's what, racism or genocide or anything like that. You should have to have the talk about complicated subjects. And I go like, while we're at it, why can't we use that to go, let's also include like why did we go from, if you're a working person, you work 7 days a week until you died from basically, you know, running your body into the ground, to, you know, you can't work more than this amount of hours a day. You have to be paid this much. You can't be underpaid. You know, you have to be valued as a person in your work. But, you know, why has that never come into education? I mean, that might be the liberal progressive side of, you know, me thinking like, why is it that we learn, you know,
a great deal of that is through the Enlightenment period, though, where those conversations were being had. And here's the funniest thing: it's like those were being raised by effectively, as I was referencing just then. I mean, a bit haphazardly because I need to do the reading, but still, the landed gentry and the people that were coming from those places, they had almost the means and the desire to actually ask and explore,
because they had the leisure time.
And they basically wanted to explore ideas. And I mean, we could just be striking into so many contentious places. But,
really could. I'm going to throw in the thing about the fact that when you still meet somebody who still throws out the word Illuminati, and I have to, like, I don't let it pass anymore. I don't let it pass in conversation. I don't let it pass on social media. I said, do you know what the Illuminati originally was? I go, right. It was people who weren't going to be beaten over the head with puritanical religious bullshit, meeting up in little secret places and going, I don't think that the moon revolves around the earth. I actually think that the moon and the earth are actually one and connected, and actually they go around the sun, and there's planets, not demons, angry sky people up there. And that's because that meant that as that information disseminated amongst other people as best they tried to do, that meant that mostly the Catholic Church is pissy at that, because that meant they lost control of the populace, because they couldn't keep them in with fear that, like the sun won't come up tomorrow unless you pray harder, unless you give more to the papacy or the local, clergy and that sort of thing. And the second that, I go like, look, every time
I think they actually, sorry to jump in on you, but I think they actually excommunicated the guy that was putting forward at the time that the earth revolved around the sun rather than
they did. Around. Well, didn't they? Was it Galileo? I can't remember. Who was it?
Was it Niccolo Galileo? I can't remember his name exactly.
Oh God, I'm thinking. I'm literally blanking on that. But I do remember that he was excommunicated. I think it wasn't Thomas More or someone like. Wasn't he put to death for sort of for basically suggesting that the earth revolved around? I'm really blanking on this. I don't know if you've got it in front of you, but
I'm doing it right now.
You're doing it right now. Okay,
just on my Niccolo Copernicus.
Copernicus, that was it, right?
He was the one that was bringing that forward, and effectively, like the Catholic Church did with most thinkers at the time, which
burn them,
because the Renaissance effectively was
wiped out their greater influence, really. I mean,
well, it was basically it was still very much couched in a sort of like a religiosity, but it was also based in a science, a blooming of sciences.
I think it went from like, religion was still important in people's lives, but it wasn't like, why does this happen? And it's not just because God said so, shut your trap, and so that, I think that came along. And also that, jumping back to the Industrial Revolution, that was the start of that kind of like leveling of the playing field of education, because that's actually a thing. The Industrial Revolution is like, really, there weren't really schools as such, and because of the allowance of what one might call free time as the revolution brought, because machines helped do the work, that it basically, when they had children, they didn't also have to go straight into back-breaking hard labor. They could go like, we could teach them things, and we could actually have like institutions, like set forms of institutions, and as you said, standardizations of things, and that's like school came along, and also things like unions and trade unions come along. But also what is interesting as well, and I'm not saying this in a like I absolutely stand by it or absolutely decry it way, but that's the roots of socialism, and to a lesser extent, full-blown communism, are also traceable back to the Industrial Revolution. Mostly
sorry to cut you off, but ultimately from that period, like I keep referring to the Enlightenment period, but ultimately what came out of the Enlightenment period and what was actually very founded through and because of the Industrial Revolution with the ideas of capitalism and socialism, few people actually appreciate these two things are bedfellows more than anything else. They are opposites in a way, but they also share the same origin point.
I guess so, yeah. I guess if you're calling it inventive capitalism, in terms of like, you want to make a thing that does actually benefit
because it ultimately comes from materialism rather than transcendental perspective. It comes from the place of ultimately going, what are we doing? What is in front of us? What do we think about it?
Looking at something, going, what is it?
Ultimately, materialism is not just the objects that you create, but also how you materially are in a certain context.
You know what? I've never thought of it that way before, but you've opened my eyes to thinking about that's quite a good way of looking at it.
Because it's no longer just because ultimately before, even through like the 17th century, but before the 17th century, effectively the serf, the layman, even the gentry to a degree that were landed, still perceived their existence as God intended. So it was basically, there was no room for interpretations beyond too far outside of that scope, and nor did they want to, nor were many people educated beyond that. I mean,
I think most people weren't educated enough to even grasp the tendency.
Most education throughout the majority of civilized history has been through religion, and that's been good. That's also been very bad, because it's obviously led people into very sort of like zealous and
puritanical, often leading to violent ideology. So I think that you're right, as in like they've carried things like as much as I have problems with all religions and the core of Islam in total, but like the most of the things from thousands of years ago were not, they were preserved by Islamic scholars, and they were able to basically keep all that kind of like numerals, mathematics. They were able to transmit that through history. And what's quite sad is that things like, let's just, if we have to boil down what the most, and I hate to use that word, the most dangerous form of Islam now is Wahhabism. Like Wahhabism, which is basically what rules Saudi Arabia. Very fundamental, very like almost quite neophyte in a way, but like any technology that helps them gain dominion is great. Any technology that helps anybody fight against that, or sort of what you might call expand the scope of the average person to better themselves without use of religion, that's bad. It's like Toyota Hilux with a whack and great machine gun on the back and a mobile phone. Brilliant. Yeah, a kid being able to get on the internet and find out that there's a better life elsewhere outside of Islam, that's bad. So it's that kind of, in a way, that kind of Ludditism is exactly the same, and also the distaste for art as well. And that you could probably relate that, as in like you also see with the Renaissance as well. You got a load of art with it, because I think people had that ability to take leisure time and create, and it wasn't just like I get up, I go and do a backbreaking job, I come home, I eat 3 meals in the day if I can, I go to bed, eat, sleep, repeat, and do that until my heart caves in. It was like, I have time. I've got time to think about the bigger things. I've got time.
I think in terms of the context of the Renaissance in Italy, I think a lot of that was due to the fact that a lot of the centres of Renaissance thought were actually republics more than monarchic societies, which basically means that citizens were effectively citizens rather than just serfs class and feudal class, and that allowed them to have effectively, because they either were, for instance, in Florence, and in Florence, where obviously Leonardo da Vinci was based out of for a lot of the Renaissance. A lot of the people there he was effectively, I'm trying to put my thoughts together, but he was basically supported quite a lot by what's the term I'm looking for? He had a lot of
backers, or
basically they invested money into him for his expertise and for his artisanal things, for prestige and their own personal advancement.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. I thought he was like a total not self-made man. I thought he was like a one-man shop sort of thing. It's kind
of like he effectively worked for what was the name of the Medici. He was working for the Medici family in the Renaissance, which were basically, I've got the thing right here. They were the rulers of Florence at the time, and family of bankers, like a lot of Italian noble families were, and basically they sponsored is the word I was looking for.
Sponsored.
Thank God for that.
That was looking me straight in the eye. Sponsored.
They were sponsoring his work, and it was effectively a lot of that was the foundation of the Renaissance. Is basically in order to because it was all upmanship. I mean, there was a where was it? There was a Italian township that is well known for its towers, and basically this township effectively had two rival counts or dukes or noble people, and basically their entire time in the town and their lives was based on building these ostentatious towers, trying to out tower one another. And as silly as it sounds,
It kind of sounds. I'm pretty sure there's a Bible story about why that's not necessarily such a good idea with the word tower in it.
Yeah, try not to reach heaven and try not to outdo God's works. Anyway,
yeah, exactly. something along those lines. Yeah, because then you'll all fall down and you'll end up speaking different languages, and that'll serve you right for trying to break into the neighbour's seat. Break through the neighbour's seat.
Yeah, that's what God tells you.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. It definitely happened. It's Old Testament, so it 100% happened.
Yeah, just as a caveat, I'm more sort of like through what I've been learning through Jordan Peterson's work and his analysis and interpretations of religion. I take it more sort of like metaphorical and in terms of like the stories.
Gnostic, because I
would say it's more agnostic. It's kind of like I understand what religion is raised for. Obviously, there's the corruption and the aspects of where it gets put to a dark intent, but ultimately there's the one kernel thing I keep coming back to about religion when I discuss it is like it effectively helped amalgamate civilization and the concept of civilization because it brought together people under one belief. And,
I'd take that. Yeah,
and basically, it's effectively they bring them into one place. They go, okay, this is the pantheon of gods that dictate our existence in this place. We all work under their purview, and we all work to one end, and we'll guide you in the direction that pleases them most. And ultimately, that was the whole Fertile Crescent. That was the whole foundation of civilizations in this valley and in the Euphrates Valley civilization, river civilization. Excuse me.
Right. So I would, because I, in terms of that, there's a very good. I probably reference Patton Oswalt in probably every podcast we do because I just think he's a brilliant comedian. But there is a bit where he says, as an atheist, I love religion what he does is he basically boils down to, some people kind of, used it to get power over more vulnerable and not very bright people, but at the same time, it did kind of just stop people from going, oh, I want that mule over there. Stab the owner, take the mule, and all that thing. Just stopping it from kind of devolving into chaos, like bringing people out of that kind of, hunting.
Because ultimately, before ultimately we were nomads before. Ultimately, that was the existence that we had, and that was the
travel from place to place, looking for resources, or
following herds, following seasons. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, that was the lot of things. Since after the Ice Age, that was basically what we were doing. It's only after we started amalgamating into more concentrated groups of people, I just realised we're going into major tangents all over the place, and we're about as far away from...
my watch has told me we are about an hour and 10 in, but I am going to allow you to finish your thought, actually, because actually it's nice. It sounds like it'll be a nice sort of sewn up thing of which we can take a spike from that and then maybe make that next week's topic.
Oh, let's do that. But generally that whole principle of that being a sort of like a social amalgam, basically coming together. How do you get disparate peoples that are naturally distrusting and very sort of primitive, to say a word, to
make them unite under
a transcendental motive. Ultimately, that's the main thing.
An incentive to do well, an incentive to do good by others. So
this is the one thing about religion which can get confused, and people sometimes in bad faith don't really want to admit. But if you take a external judgment about yourself and your conduct, obviously this is one thing that is I'd say one of the sort of issues with our enlightenment and our liberalization and the sort of humanizing of our perception of ourselves is the fact that we're our own worst critics and judges, and there's not really a way to divest that judgment from ourselves as there is from having a transcendental figure such as God, such as whatever figure you want to put as Zeus, Odin, whatever transcendental figure,
whatever thing you want to, kind of look up to.
And again, context and the cultural situation and where they're at justified those deities. But having that transcendental figure ultimately took that weight off their shoulders in a way. I mean, it put a weight on their shoulders, certainly, but it also took that
the fear
self-deprecation.
the fear of punishment put the weight on their shoulders as well. But the desire to do well by the standards set, also probably helped.
And it wasn't down to you. It wasn't ultimately down to you, because I mean, this is we've obviously. I don't really want to disparage like past generations as much. I mean, don't get me wrong, bad things were done, and bad things will be continued to be done into the future, and people will judge us for it.
Yeah, but we won't hold up to the standards of 2050, I don't think. So, or maybe
2050, 2060, they'll look back on all this confusion and be like,
how did they not get it right? Yeah, like how did they miss the obvious thing, which we as old fucks will basically be like,
you never understood when you never understood.
It's like you used to make TikTok videos, and that was good enough.
It's like we're all turning to Joe Biden. But
yes. Listen here, Jack. It's just, where the hell am I?
Corn Pop will get his day. I'm really going off track. I'm really going off track.
Oh dear. Do you know how hard it is to not necessarily be a fan of Donald Trump and not be a fan of Joe Biden right now?
Oh, God,
horrible middle ground it is to not have anyone to stand behind.
Yeah, you're just like kind of going.
Like, what do I want? AIDS or mild syphilis? Like, this thing will
be scratching either way.
Yeah, I will. I'll just be itching either way. I think we've done. Yeah, but I mean, do you have a thought to finish, or because I actually think?
I mean, let me try and tie that off, because I'm terrible for this. But religion is not as bad on its own as it's made out to be in a reactionary sense. I mean, there was obviously, in terms of the polarization of the right wing being sort of like traditional and having religiosity and stuff like that. The reaction to that was to be very, very anti and very atheistic and very hostile to any concept of belief system that wasn't based in the moral construct that we made, which ironically is sort of pretty couched in our time as a religious society, and especially in the UK. I mean, that's an entirely different.
We've never, I don't think, we've never been as lent as hard into it. Also, because America is based on getting away from one religion, so you can basically form your own, and or rather that you're not forced to have one particular religion.
Yeah, ultimately, that was the entire reason for their flight from the British Isles. Ultimately, was like the opportunity of the New World was effectively to found a new reality and a new dynamic for society. And obviously, they came up with a new religion of a sort of like Puritan belief systems, which
the idea that if the horrible idea that somewhere, somehow, somebody that you don't know is having fun. Yeah. And somebody out there might be happy. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. It's like it was a very chaste culture that they had going over there, and it came to be a very chaste culture as they settled. But I mean, that's actually something probably you could explore quite in depth. But I think seeing as we kind of went off the rails with the Industrial Revolution a little bit, keeping it peripheral would be a good idea for the next one. We could just glaze over it and talk about it like that.
I do think that's good. I think, and what's interesting is that despite the fact that the same people who will, what you might call fire and brimstone, scream about Jesus and being, basically an America being one, are also seemingly unaware that their constitution very much dictates that there shall be no establishment of a state religion, and that the idea of the fact, I believe, if I'm right in thinking, in God We Trust was only added to the currency in the early 50s because the idea that you would be godless was a little bit communistic for some. So that was actually apparently that was a very small. I hate using the word psyops because it makes me feel like I'm turning into Alex Jones, but it's a very, very minor sort of.
Basically, space aliens.
Basically, space aliens, and they got the tinfoil. They got the water that's turning the frogs gay.
But yeah, I do appreciate that. I mean, obviously, I keep leaning into the clarification of the difference in terms of structuring and culture and mentality, and how. I mean, over the United States, there is a very distinct separation between states' rights and the federal oversight. And this is the reason why a lot of criticisms towards the president, not even Donald Trump as him occupying the space, but as the president, as the role
of the president.
You cannot intervene in state politics and state governance without their request. This is why I was so very pointed on talking about the whole situation with like, oh, Donald Trump hasn't controlled these riots and this unrest in these in these cities. It's like they're still in the states that are governed by these governors and mayorships, and they still very much have the authority to say, no, we don't need your help. I mean, Chicago, for instance, you've got this poison dwarf, in my own opinion, honestly, looks like a gremlin. That is the mayor of Chicago, and she was like, "Man, I don't need lessons on leadership from Donald Trump." Yeah, all the while, and several days later, there was the biggest riot they had up until that point. So it's like, yeah, I mean, you're not really handling it well. So you're swinging left and right, trying to own the big orange man, and ultimately, that's what I find of a lot of these state level and city level politicians. They're not civically minded; they're ideologically minded, and it's not helpful towards the. You should
do this. Do right of your citizens and the people who voted you in for what you know to be the right thing, rather than. If the right thing is to do something that maybe even, somebody like Donald Trump suggests, and I'll say this is someone who doesn't like him and doesn't support him, but even though if you sort of go like, whichever side of the the aisle that I stand on, that's the right thing to do because it keeps people safe, or it does this and that.
There's your principles and your beliefs, and obviously different ideologies of the Democrats and the Republicans and whatever permutations of that notwithstanding. There's some things that just should transcend those differences, and law and order and the safety of your communities should just transcend that partisanship in my mind. And
I have respect for people, like people who are on, say, like my side of the aisle, going like I'm never Biden, in the same way that I respect people who go like I'm a Republican, but I'm a never Trumper. I go, well, at least you're not following the party line because you're being told to get in shape if you don't morally agree with what it is. But often those people find themselves without representation, and they find themselves without a figurehead to stand behind, which does make things, terribly difficult, but terribly convoluted and often, leaves you in a state of eternal confusion and,
for me, in terms of the whole never Biden, never Trump thing, like, don't get me wrong, I don't support Biden's candidacy for president in the United States. Not that it's even my place to actually have any sway over that, but
no, it's not mine either. I'm not mad. I'm not mad keen on it either. So like, I can't tout what he's putting out there because I think it's pretty It's like the fact of the matter is, I think that you'd probably agree with me this on John, despite the fact that if you had somebody like Bernie Sanders had won the candidacy and he was going full-throated, you would say, like, look, I don't agree with what he is, but at least he's 100% standing behind like a very definite set of principles. Because I think also a lot of people
actually represents something ultimately.
Something, exactly. Yeah, he stands behind it. Whether people say, oh, what he stands behind is nonsense, or whether he stands behind is, at least he's standing behind it. He's not going, look, my selling point is I'm not Trump. It's like, well, you had someone whose selling point was not Trump in 2016, and look how well that turned out.
It just happened that she wasn't Trump, but she was Hillary Clinton.
But she was, exactly, but that didn't necessarily float the boat of a lot of positive. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing is, like, most of my friends in the States are of the same mind. They're like, 2020, and I've got to do all this again. I can't even get behind somebody that I like again. Like, why am I given? Why are the options given to me? And I sort of feel like if you're, I think that you say we don't have a system. At least over here with my politics, it's like, look, you can't say that I'm a sort of woolly, empty-headed person who doesn't really stand for anything because I'm a Labour Party supporter. If you are a Labour Party supporter, and we mentioned this in the first episode, at least you know what side someone's bread's buttered if they like stand behind those parties. In America, it's just like you've got a right wing and then a centre right wing, and then that's your options for as much as you go. Whereas the Overton window would mean that somebody like Eisenhower now would be considered too radical for the Democratic Party, too radically left. That's how mad it is. Eisenhower, one of the best Republican, I think one of the best presidents, Republican or Democrat, he was one of the best presidents America ever had. And he would just like his views on, wealth distribution, taxes, public funding, all that kind of thing, infrastructure programs, both sides would be mad at him. Both sides would go, that's totally, and ironically, if he stood now or like someone ran with his policies, and they would both probably say that's pie in the sky type thing. And then someone said, no, this is Eisenhower's thing. Richard Nixon, formed the EPA. What are the odds? Get that hippie out of the ring.
To be fair, there's so much about that kind of mentality. I mean, there's a lot of nuances to be pulled out of there. For our context, obviously, we're a representative democracy, and
proportional isn't it? Proportional
to a degree. I mean, we're first past the post.
First past the post, yeah. We want to be proportional.
I mean, that's another discussion to have entirely, and I don't know if I could do it just at this point. But for me, where we're at in terms of the politics in this country, I would feel that, I mean, you quoted the Overton window, and obviously that's the perception that is acceptable and not acceptable in the mainstream.
Rather, what falls into, so if anyone doesn't know what the Overton window is, it's almost like the aperture of which you view sort of opinions or ideologies and where they sway left and where they left wing, where they sway right wing.
I would say, and I mean, there could be disagreement in this, but generally the accepted zeitgeist of the Overton window today is a sort of centre left to progressive leaning, which is basically the centre of that Overton window.
I would say that socially, I would say that though. Like I wouldn't say it. I'd say that the social, like it's not gone one way in social and economic, because I feel that really those are the two major pillars of which ideologies stand. They stand on social, how you view people of different stratas in terms of and then there's how you run an economy or how you let an economy run, and that's in terms of, I think that most people are sort of centre-ish, centre-right, maybe leaning on the economy more now, but those same people will still be maybe quite socially in terms of sexual race, LGBTQ issues, sort of equality of the genders. That's still, I would say, majority wise is still quite middle to left.
Yeah, I would say I mean, it's all up in the air and there's a lot of confusion about it, but mainly because of social media's influence, and generally we're very sensationalized by the media. So we don't really have a sense of where everyone is at. I mean, you haven't exactly taken a straw poll over everyone that lives in your general area. So you're going off of, and I put this charge to myself as well, you're going off of what you're perceiving through the internet, social media, and what you're focusing on. So
that's why I'm glad. That's why I'm glad to see a lot of the country. That's why I'm glad I do travel and do what I do. And I go,
that's to your benefit, man. That's to your benefit. Honestly, I should do more of it myself. Just being completely honest with myself, it's like get to see different situations and different perspectives on where we're at, because it's not just me living in this country, as much as I may pontificate and
within 48 hours, I went from, I would say that Preston is one, like where I was in that part of the north. That's still very much a sort of Labour voting, sort of what you might call working socialist kind of democratic socialist sort of neck of the woods. And then I was in like basically a retirement community in Cambridgeshire, which was basically pretty much the polar opposite. But I should still imagine that, like, in a weird way, possibly the working class towns of the north might actually still be a bit more aggressively against kind of what one might call sort of the ideas of LGBTQ fairness or gender equality, or not overt or so. But then again, you might go to the the little retirement place in Cambridgeshire and Norfolk that I visited. They kind of might be they might be, I'm absolutely fine with that, but I'm totally Tory blue till I die. I'm totally like little to no taxes. I'm totally deregulation. I'm totally like no tax on my inheritance or whatever. So in a weird way,
don't talk so dirty to me.
Oh, sorry. I just mentioned deregulation.
Deregulation and no taxes.
It's perfect. It definitely wouldn't end up like Somalia. Anyway,
just take what you want. It's fine.
It's what you want. I have the ultimate credit card here, and it takes 7 bullets. And
it's Kalashnikov.
It's a Kalashnikov. Yeah, we have literally pinged into an hour and a half. So this has been this is very much this has become the Lord of the Rings extended version of Ozzy and John talk stuff. Yeah, massively. So what I would do is we will pick something from the threads that we have created over this last an hour and a half. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll pick up on it and start a new one next week. We hope to see you all there. Once again, likes and things in comments, what you want us to talk about, what you want us to discuss. Is there anything where you want to know where we differ, where we're the same? And until then, what I'll say is it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And a very goodbye.